All right. I just lost my thing, which is good that I know this next gentleman. So I lost my thing about you, Justin. So Dr. Rush is coming up to talk to us today. I think he has probably the most interesting title of the day. Are we able to advance this slide? Oh, they're switching your slides. Anyway, we're going to revisit the F word today with Dr. Rush. He's an amazing educator, is part of the Northern Colorado Hospitalist team and does the Director of Education for the inpatient in our post-acute branch. He has a lot of accolades and awards, and so it's just my personal privilege to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Justin Rush.
All right. Dr. Jackson, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys. I recognize I have one of the later time slots. I'm going to try to keep you guys awake as we go through this today, but we're going to try to have a little bit of fun with feedback. I always mention feedback as the F word because it's a little taboo. Like, admittedly, when you think about feedback, don't you just kind of bristle back a little bit and realize you don't want any feedback? And I think that's how a lot of people actually feel. But we're going to talk about it in the capacity to actually leverage for better patient outcomes. Okay, there we go. I have no disclosures for this event today. So our objectives for today, I want to make sure that you can describe why feedback is important in collaborative care, thinking about our interactions with the inpatient setting, hospitalists like myself, and how we can make sure that we can better collaborate on behalf of our patients. Define the 6 evidence-based practices of delivering good feedback. And then finally, we're going to try to demonstrate the use of the feedback with good judgment model if we have some time today. So feedback is critical in collaborative care for a couple of different reasons. Number one, it really provides some insights into blind spots. We all have blind spots, things that we do that we're not aware of that might be really beneficial for our patients, but also sometimes may be a hindrance to the care that we might be able to deliver. And I think about those as blind spots, things that we do not recognize that we actually have. I think it also can demonstrate that we care about the performance of others. Now, I give a lot of feedback to medical students. My main, I suppose, identity that I wear is that of a clinician educator. So I have to provide a lot of feedback to medical students. And medical students, oftentimes, they want a lot of feedback. But at the same time, if it's not delivered correctly, they also tend to push that feedback away or disregard that feedback. So we have to make sure that the learners know that we care about the performance. And similarly, I think we want to make sure that our peers know that we care about one another. It norms physician behaviors, and that means that it makes it more acceptable, easier to get that feedback. And finally, it's a necessary component in clinical development. I always think about feedback in sort of a biochemical sense too. First time you ever touched a hot stove, if you ever did, you got that noxious biochemical stimuli that told you to remove your hand. It was painful. Now, we need that same type of feedback in clinical practice as well to reinforce things that we should be doing more often, and also things that maybe we shouldn't do as frequently. All right, so why don't we give feedback more frequently? Well, I think number one, or the most oft-cited reason, is that we're afraid. We don't want to hurt the feelings of others. We value the relationships we have with people, and we don't want to compromise those in any way. And I think about this as the hurt feelings effect, and because we value those relationships, we don't want to sacrifice them. We have time constraints. You're all very busy, and it can be difficult to actually find the time or carve out the time to give that feedback and to give it with the purpose that you intend. We fear sometimes that our observations aren't valid. Sometimes we're not certain about the observations that we make to provide that feedback aren't really accurate. And then finally, we recognize that medicine is high stakes, and that means high stakes feedback. I think we might have skipped forward there just a little bit, but that's okay. Sometimes we get very high stakes emotional feedback that we feel like we need to give, and we have to sit on it for a little while so that we can give that feedback with the purpose that it needs. So what are the feedback myths? Well, number one myth is that people don't want it and or they can't take it. I think this is a mental construct that is based in some inaccuracies. I think when we think about feedback, oftentimes we visualize it as being categorically punitive. Again, when I say that word feedback, just everybody's like, ooh, I don't know if I want any of that. Not today. And then I think sometimes if we don't see it as categorically punitive, when we think about feedback, we think about it as either good or bad. Have you guys heard about the feedback sandwich? Anybody? Like I see a few head nods. It's like good feedback, bad feedback, good feedback. And we do that because, once again, I think we care about the feelings of the person we're delivering the feedback to. And I'm going to call into question the feedback sandwich, and really I'm going to try to get you all to buy into maybe a different model for giving feedback in a more genuine way. I think the feedback truths oftentimes, and especially for learners and for peers, is I wish someone would have told me. That's what I hear most often, and that's what I think about myself. I receive feedback. In fact, I receive feedback every day from my loving wife, but I get feedback from colleagues who tell me about things that I've done or even things that I might have missed, and that is really helpful for me to think about how to change my practice. I think, again, it can highlight those blind spots, once again, to reform the practice. And finally, I want you to think about feedback as either being reinforcing, we're trying to make sure that we're reinforcing a habit, or reforming, trying to change something. Not good or bad, reinforcing or reforming. You guys with me still? All right. So what do we do to create a good environment for feedback? Number one, I think we have to create some safety in that interaction. I think number two is that we want to avoid bad assumptions, and in its place, we want to try to create some good assumptions. So let's talk about creating some safety and giving feedback. I like to elicit feedback and not give illicit feedback, which is to say that really bad, noxious sort of feedback that you don't want under any circumstance. I like to set the stage with clarity and expectations. So it's really easy to give feedback when someone knows what the norm is that they're up against. And this is particularly true for learners, but I think when I reflect back on the feedback that I've received from colleagues in the post-acute setting, it's really helpful to know what your expectations are so I can make sure that my discharge summary or the way that I'm reconciling my medications really helps you do the best job that you can to continue the care for that patient. And so I think having that feedback is really beneficial. I try to give reinforcing feedback with the same frequency as I give reforming feedback. I really try to make sure for my learners or my colleagues that I can give them the kudos that they deserve, but also give them the insights on those blind spots that they might need to think about. I like to share personal narratives, so sometimes it's really beneficial when I have to give more high-stakes feedback, that if I can norm it and make sure that someone understands the feedback that I'm giving, I received at one point myself. And finally, I like to remind everyone to think about delaying that high-stakes feedback. Sometimes if there is very emotional feedback that we need to give, there was maybe a bad outcome that we both perceived, we need to sit on it for a little while. Not let it go for a week or a month before we give that feedback, because we need to make sure that we provide the feedback in a timely fashion. We want to make sure that we can do it at a time when we're not emotional, and perhaps the person on the other side is in a better state to receive that feedback. So we need to try to avoid bad assumptions. So what we might see as one particular situation, someone can identify that same exact situation in a completely different context. And the example that I always like to have is if I held up a Coke can in front of you, I might ask you to describe what it is that you see. And I did this at a big conference, and someone said, oh, I see the Pepsi logo. And I was like, well, I disagree because I just see nutrition facts. It's a good concrete example of the fact that we can see the same situation from two very different perspectives, and that is constituted by the multitude of our life experiences. And so I just want to encourage you all to think about that. So what are the 6 evidence-based practices? So it's making sure that your feedback is timely, that it's objective, that it's specific, that it's planned, that it's relevant, balanced, and then I just add in, I think it should be void of personal attacks or emotionality. Let's talk about this. Timeliness. Making sure that we give the feedback when the behavior is still memorable. Trying to make sure that we don't delay that too long, but we give the feedback when we both have a shared sense of when that instance took place, or making sure that we're highlighting that blind spot. Planned. I try to make sure that I've contemplated the feedback that I want to give with deliberateness and really without emotion as much as I can. Objective. I think this is key, and the most important thing that I think you could take away from the session today is to make sure that the feedback you're going to try to provide is a commentary on what was observed, not what was intended. Once again, a commentary on what was observed, not what you think the other party intended. I think that's the most common error that we make in giving feedback, is we think we know what the other person intended, we know how we felt about it, and we try to give feedback under those circumstances. We want to make sure that it's relevant. We want to establish why the feedback matters to the other party. We want to make sure that it's, once again, balanced, reflect on what should be reinforced as well as what should be reformed, and then specific. And this is mostly important when I think about giving feedback to learners, but it's important we give feedback to one another. I want to make sure that we avoid those generalities, specifically for reinforcing feedback. We have to move beyond good job. I'm sure all of us at one point in time or another in our training were told, hey, read more. Good job. Like these vast generalities are like, thanks, I guess. Like I try to read a lot. Am I not reading enough? I don't know. What's the standard? It's that feedback that's not very helpful for us. And so we want to make sure that we can move beyond that. So the basic assumption that works for this model is that our colleagues or our learners are all intelligent, they have a unique point of view, and they care about doing their best. And you just think about if we accorded these three facts to everything we did in life every single day, how much of the benefit of the doubt you would give to someone else, maybe who cut you off in traffic. Maybe they're on the way to the hospital because they have a loved one who's in crisis and they're trying to get there as fast as they can. They're not intentionally cutting you off, but you think about how often we interpret their actions. So once again, just frame this as everyone's intelligent, they have a unique point of view, and they care about doing their best. So the model I'm going to show you comes from the anesthesia simulation literature, and it was based on a paper done by Rudolph back in about 2007. It's called the Feedback with Good Judgment model. This came out of a Debriefing with Good Judgment article. And so it starts with the observation. You want to observe what was actually noted or comment on what was actually noted. Then you want to advocate. You want to establish that norm, what your frame actually is. And then you want to offer up an inquiry. And the intention of this is to create a cycle of feedback, basically a dialogue between yourself and someone else. So objectively note the behavior, relate why that behavior was important, initiate dialogue with curiosity, and then you repeat the process as necessary. And I'm going to show you how this works. And for those of you who are either Walt Whitman or Ted Lasso fans, I think about this as the be curious, not judgmental, but be curious with good judgment model, I suppose, as it were, is how we're going to try to approach this. So let's talk about the process, starting the conversation with observation. Once again, observation does not equal interpretation. You want to name the behavior, not what you think they intended. So this might look like, I noticed that in your discharge summary, you didn't mention the patient was discharging on the nasal. You're observing something. You're not commenting on the goodness or badness of this. You're just commenting on what you noticed. Then we advocate, and we create this advocacy to relate to the other party why this was important. It establishes your frame, it highlights potentially the blind spot, and it can also offer solutions. And it tells the receiver why you're giving that feedback. And so this might be something like, you know what? Mr. Parker's on a couple medications already that might cause this untoward side effect, and I just wanted to make sure we reduce the risk of serotonin syndrome. That's a good advocacy statement. You have framed your consideration for why you're offering the feedback back to that other provider. Now, this can also look like, patients find it helpful when a new paper showed, it was important because, or when that happened to me. There's any number of statements you can use to advocate. The point is that you just want to make transparent to the other party what your frame is. And then we inquire to understand. This is that curiosity piece. You have to be invested in what that other party actually has to say, not just what you want to convey. You generally want to seek out what it is that they were trying to do. It reflects your attention, it allows your peer to reveal their thinking, and it highlights some learning or care opportunities. How did you see it? I wanted to understand your perspective, or maybe in this circumstance, I figured you might have had a good rationale, I just happened to miss it. Any number of these are great ways to offer up that inquiry to just allow that other party to reveal their thinking for what it is that they did and why they did it. Still with me? All right. So ask yourself, WTF, what's the frame? What is that other person thinking about? What was it that they were intending? How did they see that situation that was different from my own? All right, so we're going to try to put this into practice. I think we have enough time. So I'm going to ask you guys to watch a video. Don't comment on the acting in this video, please. And I want you to think about an observation of behavior that you notice. I want you guys to then turn to a peer, share what you noticed with them, and discuss how you might advocate and inquire. So think about the observation. And then think about subsequently what your advocacy and inquiry statements might be. We're going to see if we can get this to work here. And hopefully we have audio.
Thank you so much.
So Megan, you need to stop and talk about what went wrong in there.
Okay.
What do you think went wrong?
I didn't think that there was anything. Was there anything in particular that you're talking about?
Megan, the gown. You forgot about the gown.
Oh, where can I find the gowns, actually?
And Megan, you should look for the gowns. They're underneath the bed, but you should know that already. You've been at this clinic for a day already.
Okay.
The other thing is her examination, her cardiac exam. I mean, where did you learn how to do your cardiac exam?
Well, I feel like I did it the way I've learned in school.
Megan, you need to make sure that you listen to the heart, and you need to make sure that you listen to it appropriately.
Okay.
I mean, these are really important with her. She's got a really tough murmur. This is your education. You need to make sure you're doing this right in the future, all right?
Okay.
Quick fact, that was one of my mentees at my prior institution, and she cried after that, even though she knew we were just acting. It was terrible. So take a moment to reflect on, so make some observations and try to think about what behavior that you noticed, not what was intended. So think about some of that. I want you to turn to a peer, reflect on this, talk about it for just a moment. I want you guys to also disclose how you might advocate and how you might inquire. So let's take about 2 minutes to do that. Okay. Try to bring it back together here. Sorry to stymie some of this conversation. I'm curious, just if someone was willing, brave enough to make an observation about that feedback that was given. And just tell me, name a behavior or something that you guys saw to start off with. Tone. So can you tell me a little bit more? I want you to be specific because tone can be an interpretation, so I want you to be as specific as you can. Say that again. Degrading. So again, this is hard because this might be an interpretation, so we have to think about, so I want you to really think about that. So was it the pace with which I was speaking? Was it how much I was leaning towards Megan in that setting? Was it my facial expression? What would you comment on? All the above? There we go. So it was fast. So the cadence of speech was quick, Justin. I noticed that you were speaking very quickly. You didn't offer the learner opportunities when you asked her a question to really disclose her thinking before you responded to it immediately. You were leaning in, and sometimes that body posture can be viewed sometimes as potentially an aggressive tone. What about my facial expression? Anybody notice that? Even I watched it and I was like, wow, that is that's just like an angry facial, like just furrowed brow the whole time. Like that might be my resting happy face, but I guarantee that it is not. What else did you guys notice? Those are some great observations. What else? Okay, and can you be more specific? Yeah, so there was some, and we can, so Justin, I noticed that when you were asking the learner about the gowns, you inferred some things that she should already know where the gowns were. What do you think about what I told her about her cardiac exam? Was that helpful? Where did you learn how to do your cardiac exam? When you listen to the heart, you need to do it well. Like, what does that mean? Like, hey, you know what? Make sure that you want to start off in the right second intercostal space. That's a good spot to make sure that you're listening to the aortic valve. Or you want to make sure that you listen under the gown, not over the gown. Or you know what? We want to make sure that we're being respectful and utilizing respectful draping of our patients as well. Those all could have been some observations. We can see how seeing an instance like this, it really conjured some emotional feelings for some of us. I'm not sure for any of you, I went through, as a medical student, a similar traumatic event like that, and it can be so hard to think about how we want to frame that feedback. And so it's important for us to think about how to make sure we can be very specific, balanced, objective in the behaviors that we note. So we mentioned some of what we saw. How might we advocate? And so, and for the being mindful of some of the time, I'm just curious if someone can throw out an advocacy statement that you might use. So Justin, I noticed that when you're providing feedback to the learner, you just immediately asked that learner where she learned how to do her cardiac exam. You could have started with offering a commentary about what she did well, and then asked. Yeah, I love that thought about trying to use a different frame. I might say, we want to advocate, Justin, I think it's important that when you provide the feedback to the learner, that you're providing specific details on their physical examination, or why it was important that they put that patient in a gown. So let's talk briefly about overcoming some challenges in feedback, and then we'll try to take some questions. I think sometimes we think about how do we give feedback to people so it doesn't hurt their feelings. And I try to meet that with, we want to ensure that the feedback is specific and objective and balanced and timed to avoid emotional stakes. But at the bottom, and I think this is important, the goal is not necessarily to salvage feelings. I think the goal is to improve performance, promote peer development, and create the best possible outcomes of our patients. We need to get over the assumption that someone can't handle the feedback. And I think we need to approach this, though, with how we deliver the feedback in a more purposeful way can make that feedback more palatable. How do I give the negative feedback? Well, again, I like to mention that feedback needs to be planned and not emotionally driven, specific and objective. When I have to give feedback in these settings, and when I sometimes had to give feedback to learners who really didn't want the feedback or feedback that was perceived as negative, these were all the levers that I used to use, and it made it so much easier to also get the learner's frame, also peers' frames when they don't want that feedback. And how do you give feedback to someone who doesn't believe that they need it? I think you really have to focus on the relevance. Everyone has a buy-in point. And so you need to just try to reveal what their buy-in point is. Now, I think there's some challenges with feedback sometimes, too. I think about these challenges as the defendant, like the person who doesn't want feedback, the eloper, the person who runs away from feedback, the waterworks, the person who might cry when they receive the feedback, and the yes man or yes woman, the person who says yes when you give them the feedback, but they don't make meaningful changes. So how do we address these? I think with the defendant, we really want to try to make sure that we're objective and specific. It's really important for us to make sure that we name the things that they cannot argue about. With the eloper, I think we want to make sure that we're being relevant and balanced. We want to know what their buy-in point is. And we also want to make sure that we're giving them the same reinforcing feedback as we are the reforming feedback, the same frequency if we can. Waterworks, I think, again, a mental construct a bit in our own brains, but we want to make sure that we're providing that feedback to them in a timely and balanced fashion as well. And then finally, for the yes man and yes woman, which I find the most difficult situation, I think we want to make sure that it's specific and relevant. So those are my references, among others. I'm happy to take some questions from all of you, though, but most importantly, I hope this was beneficial for you. Let's take some questions. In the back. Yeah. Yeah, and for those who didn't quite hear the question, just briefly, it was how do we separate the emotions to make sure that we can offer up those observations? I think number one is to just recognize what your emotions are. And you mentioned it. You feel hurt. It doesn't feel good to receive any of what he said. And those are judgments of your character, which he is not in a position to make, and I'll just remind you of that. Number two, I try to think about, though, the words that they selected, and the way I might frame that, if I were just going to try to take this example, is I noticed you used, and I guess, the words that you selected. I noticed that you mentioned that I was blank and blank. I wonder how that might make someone else feel, but I'm curious to understand your thoughts. That is a easy three-step way to just try to understand where he is coming from, what his frame is, why he is saying those things. Understanding that this isn't going to be a simple cure-all feedback model, but the intention is to make sure that you name the behavior or name what it is that they've done. So be as objective and specific about it as possible. The advocacy statement can be as low level as, gosh, I wonder if someone else heard that, if they might feel hurt by that, and then offer up that inquiry. So it might be the approach that it might take amongst many, number of different ways you can word that one out. I want to make sure that I'm mindful of our next speaker's time, because I think that's all we have, unless we had any other time. I think that's it. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
I'm going to try that with my children tonight, y'all. We're going to see how that goes. So thank you so much, Dr. Rush.